It's very difficult to do a good job being a campaign manager if you have not run for office yourself. It's not a prerequisite, but the candidate has a different view on the campaign than everybody else. And I know that sounds like it goes without saying, but it has to be said because the mental space that you occupy as a candidate and your environment and the things that you perceive and the things that are important to you are entirely different from the things that your campaign team sees and the things that voters see and certainly the news media see. And unless you recognize that, it's going to be very difficult to be an effective candidate, and it's going to be difficult to manage an effective campaign. The candidate is at once the most important person in the campaign and also just another job title. Being the candidate is a job. Okay? It's not being a prince or a princess. It's not being somebody who's going to go tell those in power what's wrong and set it to right. It's a job. And you have specific things, just like with any job, that you are obligated to do. And you have specific things that you are obligated not to do. Right? You don't do other people's job. If you're doing other people's job or you're doing something that isn't even a job on the campaign, then you're not doing your job. You're not using your time effectively. So the things that Sarah and I are going to talk about, and it'll be primarily me because I sort of asked Sarah to join me on this since she has recently been campaigning as a candidate and a successful one. The things we'll be talking about include not only the priorities of the candidate and what the job description is like, but also, more importantly, how to effectively carry out those responsibilities. Does that sound good? Okay, good. So I should say, I said this earlier, I've run for office twice, and once at the local level, which is where most of us run most of the time and where we have the greatest success, and then more recently in 2010 for state assembly in Wisconsin. And so much of what I draw on is going to be based on that race because it was a fairly successful race for the party and for progressive politics in Madison. Sarah is on the ballot running for the Madison School Board. It is a very large district, nearly 300,000 people in the district. And she had a three-way primary which she won about a month ago, winning 45% of the vote, which is a pretty stunning victory. But unfortunately is not campaigning anymore since we're moving to California. So it's kind of a strange story because you have a very successful candidate who would have won the general election but has withdrawn from the race. But certainly a lot of learning experiences in that process. And she's also gotten to see a lot about campaigns from there. So if the candidate's job is very specific, the thing I would just want people to take away, if nothing else from this workshop, is that the candidate's job is to be somebody that is a little different from who they normally are, right? To actually be the embodiment of a story. Most of us, when we live our lives, those of us who are not artificial, some people, I know there's artificial people out there, maybe fewer of them, maybe it's a more foreign concept to me being from the Midwest. People generally are pretty much what you see is what you get. Most of us just live our lives and we think about what the right thing is to do and we try to do it. What I'm asking you to do as a candidate is to play a role. Okay? And the reason why I'm asking you to do that is because that's what happens to you when you run for office, whether you like it or not. There's nothing you can do about it. You run for office, people see you, they perceive you, they make judgments based on what they think you are, for ill or for good, mostly for good, in my experience, and they put you into a box. They make you into an icon. So when I ran for for a county board, it's a local race, 14,000 people in the district in 1996. That happened to me. It was a really eye-opening process. Because I'd have people all over the place who felt like they knew me. They'd come up to me and talk to me on the street. How's it going? That didn't just happen in that election cycle. That happened for 10 years after that election. People coming up to you and saying, I voted for you. Most of them probably didn't. If they had, I would have won that election. Maybe I did win it. I don't know. It's another story. But they think they know you. Why do they think they know you? Because they got literature at their door. You came to their door. They heard about you from people. They formed an opinion, right? People are going to do that. And it was a very dehumanizing and kind of disturbing experience, even though almost all of it was positive, right? There was some negative stuff. Somebody went around posting the red, thinking that red baiting me would help them. I don't think it helped them much in that district, on campaign literature. Manski is a commie, that kind of stuff, But, even the positive stuff can be dehumanizing because, they don't know you. They don't know the first thing about you, right? But that's what happens. And it's not their fault. I mean, they don't live with you. They're just going to vote for you on a particular day. So as long as that's the case, what is the story that they know about you? What do they know about you? And what can you do to impact that? Because in the end, I think a lot of people go into elections, especially progressives, and they think, well, people vote based on policy. They vote based on platform. No, they don't. They vote based on the person. Okay? The person may embody policy. You may decide this person is trustworthy and they have values that are like mine and I can relate to them because I know that they care about the same things that I care about, right? But it is about the person being somebody who is being put in a position of trust. And that's what public office is a position of trust. And people want those people to be likable. They want those people to be people they can identify with. They want, above all, I think in the case of Green candidates, they want to be proud of them. Right? That is a major motivator in my experience for people to vote for Greens because they want to feel proud about the fact that they voted for that person or that that person was elected and represents them. You don't hear that actually about other people in political office very often. But I hear it about our Green elected officials in Wisconsin all the time. People coming up to me, I'm so proud that Tony Palmieri represents me in the city council in Oshkosh. So, okay, so I guess what I'm trying to get across, I think I'm getting across, is that there is going to be a story told about you. And you want that story to be the story that is going to make you an effective social change advocate, meaning getting elected and being able to implement policy when you're elected. So what is a story? I mean, I'm not a lit guy, I'm a sociology and law guy, but what's a story? What makes a story different than like a bullet point?
I guess it's kind of a projection of a picture, kind of a myth in a way.
Yeah. Okay. And myths, myths have what? They have heroes, right? So they have a main character, right? That's a good point. Okay. And what happens? What does the hero do?
Slay the dragon.
Okay. So it's just they don't just slay the dragon in a day, though, right? And I feel bad for the dragon lots of times. Yeah. Wish there were more snakes in Ireland right now, personally. The hero doesn't just wake up one day, slay the dragon, and that's the end of the story. The hero is born. The hero has, wrestles, you're like Beowulf, wrestles in the waves, with the water snakes, and, has feats of strength and so on. And then eventually the hero has a trial, right? And then there's an outcome, right? So there's a beginning, there's where the hero is coming from, there's who the hero is, and there's where the hero is going, right? And I won't use the word hero anymore, but it's a good point. But I'll just say that's what you're doing with your story as a candidate. Where are you coming from? People want to know where you're coming from because they want to know whether they can trust you. And if you know where somebody's coming from, you may have some sense of where they're going. That's the reason why politicians tend to tell stories about themselves. Bill Clinton was famous for this, right? Is famous for this. I forget that he lives here. Strange thing there, because that's not really part of his story in the rest of the country. He's still that guy from Hope, right? But where are they coming from? Who are they today? Who are you today? And where are you going? Okay. So, you want to jump in here at any point?
I think that's great. I have a slide where I talk about, your 2-minute story. And so you have to take your story and boil it down to 2 minutes and actually even have like a minute version, because when you go, voters are going to say, why are you running? And you don't want to give a policy reason. You want to give your story, right? And you want to repeat it over and over and over again. So you've got it memorized. Because when somebody goes and asks, let's say the other candidate sees, oh, there's a progressive in the race, I have to be a progressive too. When they go and steal your issues and say that they're going to vote exactly the same way, you want the voter to remember your story, not just that you support X or Y or are against something, right? That's how they connect with you on a personal level, and that's what they find really important.
Exactly. And Sarah had to deal with that in her school board race, where she got into the race because the only candidate in the race was somebody who had supported a private school funded with public money. And lo and behold, within a month, that candidate was saying that she never supported the private school with public money, even though it was in the newspaper, and that she had been misrepresented, and she's still saying that, right? So the difference is, Sarah has a story about combating the corporatization of public education that is well documented in the community and goes back 15 years. And this other person's story basically begins 2 years ago with her supporting this private school, right? So if it just came down to what are your positions on paper today, you wouldn't get anywhere, right? Okay. When I ran for state assembly, I worked on this pretty hard. And so my story basically came to look like this. Hi, I'm Ben Manski. I'm running for state assembly because I grew up here in the 77th Assembly District. It's a progressive district. My values were formed here, and I have worked my entire life to take on the corporate takeover of our government and our public institutions. You know me. And today, we face a threat from Scott Walker and the Republicans who are pushing an agenda of austerity. And we need somebody in the state assembly who you can count on to stand up and fight back. Democrats can't be counted on to do, well, actually I said my opponent cannot be counted on to do that. He's a corporate lobbyist for the coal industry. I will fight for full public funding for public services, a constitutional guarantee of full funding for public services, to tax the rich, and to throw the corporate lobbyists out of the state capitol. Okay? Where I'm coming from, who I am, where I'm going. That story, there are other stories I could have told. I spent a long time in the environmental movement. You know, I could have been the environmentalist candidate. Would have been an interesting contrast with my opponent. I spent a lot of time in the labor movement. I'm a union member, you know. We've been out on strike, you know. I could have told that story. I could have told a story that I'm a teacher, and I am. I teach at a community college, and everybody in my family teaches. We're all teachers. I could have told that story. I chose this particular story about the corporate takeover of our public institutions and so on. Why did I choose that story? Well, partially because it keyed into things that we could see that were coming in Wisconsin, and it was a way for us to define what that election was about in a way that made sense to voters, right? Real fears and real concerns that people had. Partially because it tied into my own history of doing work on these issues, right? So it was well documented and known and understood. Partially because of who my opponent was, okay? Who my opponent was likely to be. When I got into the race, there was a Democratic primary. There were 5 candidates? 5 candidates in the Democratic primary. I got in because I knew that one of them was almost certain to win their primary and that he would be the Democratic nominee, and I knew that I didn't want this person to be representing the place that I grew up in, right? Because I knew him to be of doubtful ethics, let's put it that way. He did. He won the Democratic primary, and I ended up facing off against him, and there was also a Republican and another candidate in the race. Part of what I did with the story was to develop a story and counterpose to who my opponent was likely to be. Okay? So, what I'm going to show you, do we have a marker up here?
That's right. The blue one.
Blue one right there. All right, let's see how this works. What I'm going to show you is something called the message box. And let me ask, as I draw it, anybody ever heard of the message box before? Any hands? Okay, good. You should always do this in every race, multiple times in the course of the election. In the top left corner of your box, you put what you say about you. Okay? This part of the box, this is what you're saying about yourself. This is your story, basically. Okay? Top right corner, you put what they say about them. So what your opponent says about themselves. Now, if you're in a genuine three-way race, then you're probably going to have to do a couple of these, right? My race, I knew that a Republican does not get more than 25% of the vote in that district. In my case, they got 19% of the vote, and I think I actually got the Republicans who didn't vote for him. So I didn't bother with this, because I knew that I wasn't running against him. I was running against the Democrat. So what did my opponent say about himself? Bottom left corner is what about you say about them. Okay? This is what do I say about my opponent. People are going to ask me. They ask you, trust me. Why should I vote for you and not the other guy, right? You have to have a good answer. And beyond that, you actually want to get ahead of people asking you that. You want them to already have an idea of what the other guy is about before they even ask you. And then what goes in the bottom right corner here? What they say about you, exactly. What they say about you. And you go through this exercise first, sort of trying to figure out what they're likely to say about you, what they're likely to say about themselves. And then, over time, you come back to this in the course of the campaign, and you see what they actually are saying about you, what they're actually saying about themselves. And that's going to impact what you say about you and what you say about them, okay? What do I say about me? Progressive values, grew up in the district, and have been an anti-corporate crusader my entire life, okay? Why did I choose that? Well, my likely opponent was a guy who had worked for the Sierra Club for many years and then left the Sierra Club and took a job lobbying for the coal industry against the Sierra Club. Okay? And I worked for an environmental group in the 1990s, and actually this guy, and I go way back, and he tried to get me fired at one point for organizing a protest against Bruce Babbitt. And so we have a long history here. You know, I've known this guy for a long time. So I think he's going to say about himself, I'm an environmentalist, right? And he did. His yard signs were green. He put a bicycle on his yard signs, right? So it said Brett Halsey, and it had a green, and it didn't say Democrat. Very interesting. In a district that votes very heavily Democrat. Didn't say Democrat. He campaigned on that. And let's talk about the bicycle a little bit. What do you do with a bicycle?
So he took this a step further and walked the doors with his bike. So he'd pull up with his van, take the bike out, and go door to door in the neighborhood, knocking on doors like, hey, I just biked up to your door. And people would tell us, hey, Brett was biking around our neighborhood. Like, this actually worked, right? I don't recommend doing that because other people saw him taking the bike out of the van, and it just kind of created this perception that he was a little strange. Also, at the forums, he would bring 6-foot-tall switchgrass as a prop to the forum, saying, we're going to switch to alternative energy and biofuels like this grass here. So he's very visual guy. Yeah, and when you do this, do not be shy. Sometimes you don't want to think about the worst thing they would say about you, but you should think about that because somebody is going to say that about you somewhere. And then you kind of get prepared for hearing it from somebody else. So think about the best and the worst thing in all of these boxes.
Absolutely. Yeah, he was more gentle on me than your opponents were on you. So we sort of could tell he was going to say that kind of stuff. I'm an environmentalist. This district, by the way, John Muir, do you know who John Muir was? I expected the Green Party thing. So John Muir lived in this district, right? He grew up about 30 miles outside of Madison. And Aldo Leopold, the land ethic, read the land ethic if you haven't read it. He's father of conservation biology. He lived in this district, okay? This is a green, small g district, okay? He knows that. He's worked in the environmental movement only to trade it in for lucre, but that's what he did. Okay, so what do I say about him? Well, I say, yeah, he worked in the environmental movement and traded in for lucre. Right? $150,000 lobbying for the coal industry. built himself a nice wine cellar with the money in the basement, you know. Normally, in most races, local races, you don't get that harsh, right? You don't get that harsh for a whole variety of reasons. One is, a lot of the time, the people you're running against are actually not bad people, right? So it's just not right to get that harsh with them, you know. Secondly, people want to like you, and you got to not give them reasons not to like you. And somebody who's always attacking their opponent is not very likable, you know, frankly, right? So it's just not effective. In this case, this guy, like, I knew how bad this guy was. And just to give you a sense, more recently, the police were called into his office to escort his staff out because they quit because he threatened them. His wife divorced him. He challenged the leader of the Assembly Democrats for leadership and only got 1 vote, his own. And this past summer, he was arrested for attacking a, 7-year-old boy at a beach where he started roughhousing with this boy who didn't want to roughhouse with him. And then accused the mayor of setting up a conspiracy to frame him because it was the grandson of the mayor's chief aide. Okay, so anyway, I was saying earlier, it's not, you know, now a lot of people are like, oh, we wish you had won. We wish you had won that race. You know, it would have been nice ahead of time. So I knew I could say those things about him because they were true, and I was running in part because I knew they were true, and I was very worried about him being elected because if the Democrats were in a position or are in a position at some point in Wisconsin where 1 vote matters, he will be that vote. He'll be the first one, you know, that is bought. And in Wisconsin, just to say, we have progressive Democrats in Wisconsin. Most of the country doesn't, you know, in my experience, you know, but we actually, so we have a strangely different dynamic than in many other parts of the country. So him being in there would have been a real problem. Okay, so what do I say about him? Yeah, he worked for the Sierra Club and went to work for the coal industry right afterwards in order to lobby against the Sierra Club for a coal power plant. Okay, what did he say about me? He actually was not very effective on this front. I mean, he basically said, you know, Ben won't be able to work with the Democratic majority. Okay, because he's a Green, and you know, and they won't, you know, he won't have any committee appointments, he won't have any seniority, so he won't be effective in office, right? He's never served in public office before. He's inexperienced, right? That's pretty much it, you know, in terms of the things he said publicly against me. We didn't even hear much else. He threatened a lot of my supporters. That was a very different story. I mean, like, threatened a lot of people, but this is the way the message box works. It's interactive, okay? So what I said about myself was in part about who I was running against and what I chose to emphasize. It was in part about what was going on in the community, but it was in part who I was running against. It was in part in a way to inoculate myself against things he might say about me, right? It was in part to prepare for what I was going to say about my opponent. So it looks like you got something to contribute.
I would say that the inoculation part is very, very important, especially if you feel like you do have some weakness that you know is going to come out. And it's better for people to hear it from you than from the other person. And the candidates are going to have their proxy messengers who are going to be a lot nastier than the candidate, who are going to be talking to people on the campaign's behalf. And so you have to be aware of that and make sure you have people who are doing that for you as well. Otherwise, it looks like you maybe don't have support. And also, I think as a candidate, it's very easy to get wrapped up in the we are enemies with this other candidate. And I really would highly recommend that people will remember you, win or lose, for the type of campaign you ran. And I would say you should try to be the better person and try to be more charitable and try to run a nicer, more humane campaign than you might feel like doing at the time. And so if you have a great campaign manager, he'll say, don't say that, or she'll say, don't write that, don't do that. Because really you should always try to be positive and charitable if you can. And yeah.
There are exceptions.
There are exceptions. Like Ben's race was one that was just, we were dealing with somebody who really was not a good person. But if you're dealing with people who are good people, I would recommend that you actually meet the person. So it's like a human being in your mind instead of just an opponent, because that will impact how you interact with them and what you say and things like that.
And just some illustrations here, and I hope you don't mind my doing this, and then I'll move it over there, is in Sarah's race, there was somebody else who was thinking about running in her race, who eventually got into the race later. And that person refused to talk to Sarah, right? When he was thinking about running. And it set up a dynamic between the two of them. He's also a progressive candidate. Like, there were actually 2 third-party candidates in this race, right? Sarah was a Green and progressive. We have a progressive party. And this guy was a progressive, right? And it got very fractious. It was really nasty and unpleasant. And when some of the things that Sarah was talking about, I mean, I think and I was involved in this process too, that we could have done better is, thinking about what they may say about her, right? We just did not think that, for example, this other person who had supported me in my race would say things like, she doesn't know anything about schools, right? That she doesn't have any teaching experience. She actually has 6 years of teaching experience, more than he does, right? She's been in Madison many more years than he does. But these are the things he said. We didn't inoculate. Initially, you ran as a green business owner who wanted to bring, green policy to the schools, and in order to basically have a different face for business, right? And so it can be important to think about the nasty things and sexist things they may say about you, people you may not expect to portray you in a certain light. Now, in the end, it didn't work entirely, but it did have an impact with some people who didn't know how to distinguish between those candidates and repeated things like, she has no teaching experience, She won't participate in any forums, even though she's been in 4 of the forums, these types of things. So you do have to do that seriously, back there and over here.
Since what your opponent said about you was in fact true, and would be true for any Green candidate that ran for office, how did you answer him?
Well, that's a great question. The question was, since what he said about me was in fact true and would be true for any Green candidate, how did I answer that? In terms of what he said about me in terms of not having served in government before, I didn't try to really respond to that. I mean, it wasn't necessary in my opinion, because I'm very well known in Madison, and so the idea that I wouldn't be able to function, like that I'm an attorney, right? And then I've been around the state legislature for a long time. The idea that I wouldn't be able to function, which just wasn't something that was even credible enough to respond to. The other one, which was that I wouldn't caucus with the Democrats, and I wouldn't be able to work with them, we were simply able to counter, because I got the endorsement of a prominent state assemblyman from across town. I was able to get Democrats to cross party lines and back me.
Right, but the criticism is still true, that you wouldn't be caucusing with the Democrats and that you wouldn't be getting any committee chairperson.
But it wasn't true, because it wasn't necessarily the case. And I mean, the party system is a little different in Wisconsin. I mean, would I have voted for Peter Barca for Speaker of the Assembly as opposed to a Republican? Yes. There's no question in my mind that I would have voted for the Progressive Democrat. And I said that publicly, yeah, I'm not gonna, I said, I'm not gonna be lockstep with them, every step of the way, but somebody's gonna be Speaker of the Assembly, right? So, I was simply able to respond that way, and I was also able to counter it again by getting the endorsements of, a lot of my campaign strategy, this is a partisan race, meaning that I appeared on the ballot as Green Party, and I'm very known as a Green in the community. So my campaign strategy, a lot of it had to do with showing that Democrats were supporting me. And we did a whole series of lit pieces on that basis. So for example, let me see here. Where's our final get out the vote piece? An endorsement from Mark Pocan, the state legislator, who's now our congressman, actually, right? This actually took some guts to do this, I have to tell you. But to say from the most progressive member of the Democratic caucus in the state assembly, I want this guy to be my colleague, not the other guy, that helped. We had a lit piece that was specifically called, here we go, "Why do leading Democrats support Ben Manski?" ? And we have the former Attorney General of the state, the Secretary of State of Wisconsin as well, various elected officials, all crossing the line. So it's a great question because, yeah, what did he say about me? Can't work with the Democrats. So what did I show? More of the Democrats supported me than him, right? Frankly, partially because he's a lunatic. But
The only thing I would add is that you have you're going to have a biggest weakness, right? And they may stick to that, or they may try to point out some other weakness, but you don't have to respond to everything they say, right? So if they're going after your biggest weakness, then yeah, you should respond to that and have a good response. If they're going after some other thing that may be a weakness, then I don't think you don't really want to respond to it, because then you're on the defensive, really. It's better to just be pushing a positive message, your message. Yeah.
Over here and then over here.
I'll hold back and after those listening to answer.
In terms of messaging, what I'm thinking is in New York City, I'm not even afraid of the opponent. What I'm afraid of is after the Democratic primaries, the voters have been brainwashed to assume it's over. The person who wins the Democratic primary is going to win automatically in November. So you're really trying to message against that perception that it's over. You're trying to show them that they should have a choice and vote for a third party. I think that's the biggest mountain to overcome with the voter. That perception. Messaging is not really a person. It's that perception that you have to somehow overcome.
That's a great point. I had the same issue to some extent in my race, and that in Madison, the races generally had been unopposed. Republicans didn't contest them. We didn't have strong enough candidates or campaigns to contest them either. And so people would vote in the Democratic primary and assume it was over. And I didn't get very much attention in my race during the Democratic primary, to be honest with you. There were two things that I was able to do, which I think can be done in other cases, certainly. One is that recruiting outside the party is important, right? I'm not somebody who came from outside the party, but in some ways I'm like somebody who came from outside the party in that I had my own base. I have my own base of support, right? Because I've done a lot of work outside of the Green Party. And so there are a lot of people who supported me because I was Ben Manski, regardless of what party, including a lot of Democratic, and Democratic operatives, but also, socialists and anarchists and lots of, it was a coalition, the Greens are in the middle, right? And so if you have a candidate who is like that, who brings something to the game, right, then that will help you with that problem. Okay. The other thing we did was we had a game changer. And in our case, the game changer was that I was endorsed by the teachers union. And so when we came out with that right after the primary, that had a pretty big impact in the news media because the teachers union is the biggest union in town. And it's a very powerful union in local elections. And so that's what we called it, game changer. We spun the message, right? We said, this is the message. It's a game changer. There's an election on. So you can't count on something like that, and we didn't count on it. But you need to have something like that to get to deal with that issue.
The only thing I would add quickly is, as a candidate, if you don't have any experience in public office already, you can set yourself up to be in a much better, stronger position to run if you are a member of a large religious organization or start joining some of the local groups that, like Rotary Club, Sierra Club. I mean, you should be a joiner if you're going to be a candidate, and try to be a part of every organization that you can. Your neighborhood association, maybe you can get yourself appointed to a city committee. So that's not necessarily elected, but you're a public official, you're representing the people.
Sarah's on the solid waste disposal.
Yes, I'm on the solid waste disposal committee, so we deal with recycling and composting, right? So, and there are just numerous things that you can do to become a part of larger organizations and on their listservs. So then when you are the candidate, you're already one of us, and you don't have to go and ask them to send out an email on your behalf because you're already a member, right? Stuff like that you could do the 6 months leading up to the campaign, which would really help.
Over here.
How do you cope with the media being against you? In my last campaign, they didn't just ignore me, deny me access. They actually went so far as my opponent's message was Greens can't win, he's not a serious candidate. And I don't know whether there was actual collusion or not, but after I gave an interview to the local paper, they not only did print the interview, they printed a story claiming that I had refused to give them an interview, that I didn't do campaign events, that it wasn't at all these events I was at, and that was, that was the message that got out.
So how do you deal with a media that's hostile, right? So there's a short-term and a long-term answer. The long-term answer is that you build media relationships so that you have some media that is friendly, right? And so that means getting to know journalists and sitting down with them for coffee even when you don't even have a story. Don't waste their time, right? But some journalists, especially in smaller media markets, appreciate that, right? Sending them information about things that are going on in the community, again, not in a way that's annoying. I just have to tell you, I'm not a journalist, but I get a lot of people who email me stuff from all over the country about all kinds of things, and I find that annoying, because sometimes it's not, sometimes it's very helpful. So be the helpful one, I guess is what I'm trying to say, not the annoying one. But build those relationships for the long term. In the short term, the answer is be the media, right? Which is sort of the standard answer of the left. So that means this is media, right? Campaign literature is media. Now, there are certain ways that campaign literature is done normally by the major parties. They have big pictures and as little information as possible. This is actually kind of an example of that, although it probably has more text than the Democrats would like it to have. Even so, this is a women's piece that we put out. So we did a women's piece, we did a labor piece, we did a UW piece, we did a Democrats piece. So this is Peg Lautenschlager. But this, for me, was not a lot of content, right? It's just a quote from Peg and from other women in politics who endorsed me. But we also put out a newspaper, right? And these can be done poorly, so don't do it if you're going to do it poorly, because you'll make a poor impression as opposed to a positive one. This is very cheap. These cost very little to print at the local newspaper in town. All the circulars are done at the same places, right? This is so it's almost like a fake newsletter for the district, the Progressive 77th. And so that's a way to get past people, and we mailed this to every single household in the district. That's a way you can do it, is be the media. But the reality is that in local media especially, it is true that the publishers and editors are oftentimes extremely cynical. They are oftentimes very partisan. And if that's the case, then you just need to accept that and deal with that and find some other ways to get your message out. I will say that in the Jill Stein for President campaign, obviously we had that same problem. The major media is not exactly friendly to the Green Party. But we didn't accept that. We put a lot of energy into breaking through in the media. And I'd say that we had a pretty good test of who the national media are who will do their job and who they are who won't, right? In fact, I have a little grade report I intend to send out at some point. MSNBC gets an F-. They were pitched every day for weeks on end at various points in the campaign. We hired a firm. I hired a media firm. Cost money, and people who are professionals. And they pitch them every day, every show, okay? They get an F-. New York Times actually gets a C, they did a couple stories and they were decent stories, Washington Post did some stories too, I was surprised. I didn't expect the Times to have any space for the Green Party, much less anything favorable, So, you do have to make the effort, and you have to be very positive about it, and you may find some surprises too.
absolutely cannot overemphasize the importance of putting out a high content piece in every single mailbox. People, when I came to their door, told me how much they loved that they felt respected as a voter. They said they actually saved it and put it like in their bathroom so they could read it, you know. And, you know, each district is different, but people come to the night before they go to vote. A lot of people gather up all their mailings and they look at them. And if one candidate sent them a card with 3 bullet points and you actually sent them something that had a lot of content, that gives them a better feeling about you. They're more likely to vote for you. So while it may be expensive to mail to every single household, you have to do it if you want to win. There's no other, you just have to raise the money to do it because it's crucial.
So final question, comment in this stream, yes.
I just remembered, I wanted to ask you, you can briefly define what you mean by the inoculation process.
Yeah, exactly, good question. So what do we mean by the inoculation process? So when you inoculate against some disease, you are actually introducing that disease or something that's like it. I have no history. Yeah, you're the scientist here. You put some dead virus in your system so that your immune system can identify it and react to it and kill it, you know, take out that virus when it comes in a more serious way, right? So that's how inoculation works with viruses. So we're talking about the same thing. So the message about me, right, that my opponent we knew was fairly likely to say something like this. I thought it would be nastier than the way he posed it. He did send me privately email messages that had lots of swear words and other things, which we decided not to use. But he wasn't saying that publicly. So the inoculation that took place was, you know, the disease was this idea that he won't be functional, you know, that I could not function in the state assembly because I wouldn't be able to operate within the way that system works. So how did I inoculate? How did I get out ahead of it? Well, you know, later in the process, we were able to get Democratic endorsements and counter it. But I inoculated against it by saying, this is the most progressive district in the state of Wisconsin. It's one of the most progressive districts in the entire country. And if we just send another Democrat to the state legislature, nothing will change. If you send me to the state legislature, everything will change. I will change the politics in the state legislature, right? So I remember actually in a TV spot we did that, right? And it was just, you know, basically, I will be more effective. Put a Green in there, who knows what he's doing, and I'll change the dynamics in the state legislature. So then when he brought it up, and he said, well, he can't work with the political system, people are like, good, you know? And that was basically what inoculation is about. So that'd be an example. So one thing I want to do is I want to sort of, we're spending most of our time talking about the story and the story box, which is good. This is actually the most important thing I want you to take away. We're going to move into the final part of the workshop in a little bit. But one thing I want to say about the story and the story box, or the message box, is that it does inform everything that happens in the campaign. When you deliver the message, you deliver your story in lots of different ways. You know, at people's doors, right? When you're going door to door. You deliver it at forums. You deliver it on the radio when you're being interviewed. You deliver it through your campaign literature. Through fundraising calls. You deliver it through television ads if you do those, right? And so if you look at the literature, I mean, there's 10 pieces that we did. But one thing that I'll share with you is that we were very conscious of this. So this is what we call an intro piece. And I like to, first of all, I'm just going to say I break my own rule. So when I said the candidate doesn't do anything that isn't their job, I couldn't find anybody who was better than me to do campaign lit. So I did my own campaign lit. That was my fun, I like to do that stuff. So that was my spare time stuff. So the first piece, you know, I like to have sort of abnormally shaped literature because it gets people's attention. So a little thing on lit design there. But the first piece is called an intro piece. It's an introducing you to the voters, right? So this intro piece sort of has the bullets. It talks about, you know, how my progressive values were formed in the 77th district, blah, blah, blah. But on the back, we have I won't call it a cartoon, but a drawing that a friend of mine did. We actually had 3 of these submitted, and she won, so we used hers. That is sort of my life story. So this is the candidate story that I was talking about. So I'll pass this around. And people really liked that. So we introduced the story. We can maybe start this one in the back. We introduced the story, and then throughout the course of the campaign, we kept on playing on it in different ways. And so, you know, you saw that certainly in the newspaper piece that we did. You saw it in, let me see here. You saw it even in some things that I did that were more opportunistic in the sense, and I don't mean that in the positive sense of like something happens and then I respond to it. So here's a piece we did on marriage equality. There was when the U.S. District Court threw out Proposition 8 in California, we did a piece on that. You know, we had like a day's notice. Gay Pride was coming up. Anyway, so we had a piece like that, but again, it fed into the message of this is a guy you can count on. He's already done work on marriage equality here and here and there. We did radio and television ads. They came out of this message box. So for example, Sarah and I were telling you about the bicycle that my opponent liked to ride around the neighborhood. So here's a radio ad that we did. We had a friend of mine who Madison has an accent. I don't know if you can hear it or not, you know. But we have our own accent. We had a guy who grew up on the west side and had an even stronger accent than I do. And so he comes on and you hear, bring, 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 bring. Brett Halsey wants you to hear his bicycle. Bring, 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 bring. But what he doesn't want you to know is that he took $150,000 to lobby for coal. Bring, 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 bring. Which is it? Riding a bicycle or lobbying for coal? You know, so, you know, that's a contrast hit piece, but it was playing on what he said about himself. People were talking about the fact that they saw him, you know, putting the bicycle on the back of his van and driving it around as a prop, right? And it played directly into this dynamic right here. We did another ad that was based on his lobbying for the coal industry. So again, what do I say about them? We did others that were more just, you know, people, testimonials talking about me or me talking about the issues and so on. So again, the story will play out in all the different areas of the campaign, your media strategy, what you say to people at doors, on the phone, when you're asking them to support you, etc. Anything to add to this part here?
I don't know what you're going to talk about next.
Next, we're going to go into candidates' time.
Okay, then no.
Okay, so, we good? Let's do a time check. 1/4 good, so we have 15 minutes. My last workshop, I was so excited with setting goals that we didn't get to most of the rest of the stuff. The candidate has a job. Their job is to recruit. Their job is to recruit 3 things. What are those 3 things, do you think, that the candidate is responsible for recruiting? Donors, okay, so dollars or donors, good. Voters, votes, okay, good. What's the 3rd thing? Volunteers. Hey, maybe you've heard this before. Excellent, good. So in order, and some campaign managers will say it differently, but I'm going to say votes, dollars, volunteers. Some people say dollars first, but sorry, I can't do that. But dollars are very, very important. These are pretty much on an equal footing, right? Anything that the candidate is doing that is not geared towards recruiting votes, dollars, and volunteers is not what the candidate should be doing. And they are not only wasting their time, but they are wasting other people's time. And that's important because you're asking other people to step out on a limb for you. And that may not be something that some of them are inclined to do, right? So take that job seriously. And if you were on the campaign team and you were asking the candidate to do something that is not volunteers, dollars, or votes, then you are distracting the candidate from their job. The candidate is not the boss. Ultimately, they're the boss in that if they don't like the campaign manager, they get rid of them, you know. But day to day, they're not the operational boss. In fact, the campaign manager is their boss. The campaign manager tells them where to go, what to say, and how to dress, okay? So that's what I did with Jill. Jill was a great candidate. You know, she was a really good candidate because she knew what her job was. Votes, dollars, volunteers. She worked hard, you know, and she didn't try to run the campaign. And that worked well, you know. So as a candidate and as a campaign team, you got to understand that that's the job. And so when you're looking at how the candidate is spending time, which is the most valuable commodity on the campaign, the candidate's time is the most valuable commodity on the campaign. That's the lens through which you're going to look at it, right? Think about this here. Good, we moved through it pretty fast. In terms of, so I'm trying to think, I had a thought which I've lost. I'm wondering if you have something to chip in and maybe I'll come back.
I would add, I mean, for your campaign manager, you want it to be somebody who, if something were to happen and, you know, you were in a dark room and you couldn't see where you were going, that would be the person to tell you how to get out of that room, right? Because in a campaign, you actually totally lose touch with what reality, basically. You really do kind of live in a different space, in a different headspace, and you need somebody who you can bounce things off of and who you actually check with before you do anything. Like if you ever get this feeling in your gut like, should I do that? You probably shouldn't be doing it. And you should ask your campaign manager whether or not you should do that or say that or whatever. It's very hard because you're used to living as an individual where you can just go and do things, right? As a candidate, you should not live that way. You should definitely go and check with other people before your campaign manager before you actually, you know, do something that you shouldn't, you know, you might not want to do. And also, you know, it's very tempting to, you know, want to be on Facebook or want to write an opinion editorial or want to call somebody and talk with them. You shouldn't be doing any of those things, probably. You should probably have other people to do them. Now, that depends on how many volunteers you have. And if you've done your work before you've announced your candidacy, you've already got a ton of volunteers and they know what their roles are. And you've got the structure set up where all you do in the morning is say, what do I do today? What events am I going to today? And that's it. And you just go out and deliver your message 100 times that day and call voters and do donor calls and things like that. Because that's really all you should be doing.
Good, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah.
What are your thoughts or, I guess, strategies addressing you know, staffing when you're really resource deprived?
Right. Right. I mean, that's critical. So you have to prioritize your staffing at all times and make sure that the people who are volunteering on your campaign, and in almost all cases, they'll be volunteers. Although, you know, don't write off for, I mean, you know, if I was here in New York City and we're running for somebody for city council, I mean, how big are the districts? $1 million campaign. Yeah, $1 million campaign. So, you know, I would definitely be coming up with a game plan to raise enough money to hire staff, you know, for one of these races. No question in my mind about that. But even so, you can be resource deprived. So just like the candidate's time is really critical, you know, the staff people need to know what their priorities are, right? And the volunteers need to know what their priorities are. And that means being very ruthless a lot of the time about people who come forward who want to do something for you, right? And some of those things are going to be very valuable. You're going to want to jump at it. But others are going to be a waste of your time. You know, and so I think I made this point earlier in the other session, which is just that, you know, your job is not to create opportunities for people to do what they want to do on your behalf, right? It is to make decisions based on the available resources and what your campaign plan is. And so as Sarah was saying, you know, writing up your 30-point platforms is not something the candidate should be doing. And frankly, it's not something the campaign manager should be doing, right? And it's not something that probably, you know, if you're at the point where you have, you know, on the Jill Stein for President campaign, we had some very skilled people helping us with our policy stuff. But for me, that was always third priority, you know, third tier of priorities compared to everything else. The other thing is that it is difficult to move into a race and to not have a team of people working with you. And so that, you know, you do the best you can in that situation. I mean, Sarah very much had that situation in her race because She got into the race at the last minute because it was an unopposed race and she was asked to by the head of the teachers union to run. But she didn't have the time to lay the groundwork like I did to build a full team. And that was hard. You know, it means it, but you don't have to do that, right? You can start now and start to identify the people who have those roles, and you can share resources. So for example, in Madison, there are certain people who are known to be good at literature design. And there's certain people who are known to be good at web design. And there's certain people who act as treasurers and know how that works. And so as a Green Party, as opposed to Green candidates, you know, we need to build that stable of skills and keep those people around and involved and share them to some extent. You know. Yeah.
Also, a candidate, I mean, you have to spend at least 2 hours every day calling and asking for money, right? That's your job. So you go to events where there's a lot of people, and then you go and ask for money for hours. So if you can't do that, then you shouldn't be the candidate, because that's a big part of your job.
Yeah, and that's sort of the last thing on my list here, which is doors, 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 and then we'll add phones, 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 right? That's what a campaign manager repeats to the candidate when the candidate's not doing their doors, 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 their phones, phones, phones. The candidate is the messenger, and they are the one recruiting the votes and the volunteers and the dollars, and they have to spend the time doing that, which means that in a district where it's viable to go door to door and to talk to the voters, the candidate has to do that every night. So our city council candidates in Madison right now, and we have 7? Wow, a lot of candidates right now. Some of them will be elected. They're going door to door today. They're definitely out there right now, you know, going door to door and knocking on doors. And they're taking notes about their conversations with people. And I'll tell you, in a day like today, that's easy, but it's been really cold this winter, the snowiest winter we've had in a long time, and they still have to go out there and do that. Getting on the phones, you know. I mean, we're Greens, we have day jobs, you know, we have families, and so it can be, it's something that you have to know that you're gonna gear up and you're gonna go out and you're gonna make those 2 hours of calls every night to get donations. And if you do it, you'll be successful. You will raise the money. You know, you build lists. You have lists that come from the party. You have lists of people who've donated to your campaign or to other campaigns in the past. You have your friends and family. You know, you call them. You ask them to donate to the campaign. Why do you do that? Because you're actually already out there running. You've put yourself out there on the line, you know, as a candidate. You can do that. They can help you out. You know, you're not doing it because it's the easy thing to do, right? It's not the easy path to power. So they can help you out, and they can help you out because other people are helping you out. So there are other people who have put themselves on the line to help you out. And so it's your job to do right by those people by making sure that they're not alone, right? You've already crossed the river, right? You're already there, so make the best of it. I think there was a hand over here. Yeah?
Forgot to get good.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so let's look at, oh yeah, the final thing. Good, we're doing good on time. Final thing is this. I mentioned this at the beginning. Being the candidate, and Sarah was talking about the headspace that you're in, is a very isolating experience. Okay, it is. Your name is on the line. It appears on the ballot line. People will either, in Wisconsin's case, cross the arrow, you know, or do the X or whatever they do in different states, right? Or they won't. And that will be a personal statement for you, whether you like it or not, okay? And it'll actually be a personal statement, in other words, an ego statement for your supporters. They've done studies that shows that men's testosterone goes way down when their candidate loses in an election, right? So part of what we were trying to, I mean, seriously, for the campaign, one of the main things I was concerned about is, you know, how do we make sure people understand the day after Election Day for Jill Stein for president, how big a step forward this was. So we made sure we had the numbers from the previous election cycles. We doubled over the last election. We doubled our number of ballot lines. We tripled our fundraising, right? Here's all the things that we accomplished because people want to be on the winning side. You know, a lot of voting, honestly, a lot of voting behavior is about being on the winning side, right? So your name is on the line, and you know that, and you don't want to be if you're a normal human being, you don't want to be rejected, you want to be approved, right? That can be isolating because nobody else is there. You're the one who's doing doors and going out there every single night. Chances are none of your volunteers are working as hard as you are, not even your campaign manager. Okay? That's going to be true most of the time, you know. And so, you know, that can feel a little weird to be out there like that. The other people don't know what you're going through, okay? Unless they've actually done it themselves, they can't.
You shouldn't be telling anybody what you're going through.
Yes, because you shouldn't be telling people, because guess what? That's not what they're voting for. They're not voting for, oh my God, this is hard and it's horrible and people are nasty and so on, right? They're voting for somebody who's going to be a public servant that they can trust in and a social change agent, right? So the reason why I drive this home is, if you know that this is what it's going to be like, then you can be not shocked by it, you know, just this is part of the job. There are some positives to the job, okay? There are positives to being the candidate. But this is that's a negative, you know, it goes hand in hand with the fact that people put you in a box, tell stories about you. You know, you have to tell stories about yourself, right? And it's very isolating. And for those of you who are working on the campaigns, you need to know that that's happening to the person, whether they're talking about it or not. There are some people out there who I consider to be, to have, I won't call it a mental illness, but they are mentally different than we are. People like Bill Clinton, for example, who don't seem to have those same sets of issues that most normal human beings have, you know. But you know, almost 99% of us are going to feel that way, right? The other side on this is that, you know, it is rewarding to be a candidate in many ways. For one thing, as a Green, you actually get to get out there and say the things that you think need to be said. You get to do the work, you know. You get to advance the cause. You don't have to be a bystander, right? You can be a social change agent. You get to meet a lot of incredible people. That's oftentimes the biggest reward. Not just the volunteers, but the people you meet. When you go door to door, you meet some incredible people, you know. When you're at the forums, you meet some incredible people. You get a sense of the power there is in your community. That's a big reward.
When you're asking for endorsements, you get to meet people you'd never probably sit down with.
Right. And the skills that you gain as a candidate can be very useful in other areas too. Public speaking skills, you know, discipline, time management skills, right? Understanding of policy issues. It can lead to job prospects, whether you want them or not. Right after I ran for county board way back when, a week later I got a call from a guy who had been the Democratic nominee for Congress in the previous election cycle, who I had supported. I thought he was a good guy. We didn't have a candidate. In fact, the Greens weren't even on the ballot at that point in Wisconsin. We got on the ballot the following year. He offered me a job working for Travelers Insurance. I had never heard of Travelers Insurance. But I liked the guy, so I just sort of sat and listened to him, and I didn't let my jaw hit the floor, you know, until later. But yeah, it can lead to job prospects too. Do you have anything you want to finish up with here?
I would just say that people, you know, no matter what happens during the campaign, if you ran a good campaign and you ran a respectable campaign and you did everything you needed to do and you worked hard, people will remember that, and they will remember positive things about you after the campaign is over, whether you won or not. And so I really think it can be very beneficial as long as you have the right perspective on it going in, and hold yourself to a high standard while you're campaigning, and also be very positive afterward. You know, if you project positivity, it will come back at you. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.